Hey, what's going on? I'm Corey Phillips, and in this video I want to show you how to improve your basses and 808s by introducing more feel. Now, what do I mean by feel? Your bass line in your track can completely make or break your production. Does it have a rhythm of its own, or does it follow something else in your track like your drums or your chords? Do some notes bend and slide into each other, or is it pretty much static and simple the entire time? Now, I'm not saying the simple is bad, but I want to show you how to take your bass line to the next step if the song needs it. Something I want to emphasize before we go further is that as a music maker, you don't have to pull out every trick of your bag for every song. The key is to know what tricks to use and when to use them in order to achieve the exact feel you're going for. So here I have pulled up a really smooth R&B type of track. I want to say you can do this in any DAW, in most any sampler, I believe. So before we go through, I just want to mention that in my sampler in Ableton Live, under pitch/oscillation or oscillator, you'll see here I have glide selected. That's very important because we want to make sure that when our notes run into each other, they glide from one to another instead of having multiple notes playing at the same time. I also have my time right here, so if I wanted, I could make that slower or faster. That affects the glide time between the notes. I'll give you an example. So I'm going to increase the glide time, making it slower. Now I'm going to decrease the glide time, making it faster. The glide time is really important when you're dealing with bends in your 808s or synths or whatever else you're working with. It really helps establish a feel. A lot of times it's going to depend on the tempo of your track, but the best way to determine your glide time is just to listen and figure out what feels right to you. Something else I want to point out is the way I'm using this sample. Now I have the start right here, which is not actually the start of the sample. The start of the sample is back here, but this happens to be a really punchy 808, and if I'm adding a kick in later, I don't really need that initial punch. What I also want to make really clear is that I'm starting my sample right when the amplitude is on the neutral line. This horizontal line right here, right when my waveform meets it, is when I'm starting. This helps us eliminate clicks in our 808 when the note is triggered. So I'll just show you what this sounds like when I have the start time of the sample right on the neutral line. So no clicks, but when I start the sample when it's in a positive amplitude or negative amplitude, which means that this waveform line is above or below the line, we get more clicks and pops in our 808. So here you can see we're starting the sample when the amplitude is below the neutral line. So you can hear whenever the 808 triggers, there's a little click or pop in the sample, and we don't want that. So I'm going to play through it without the 808 just so you can get a feel of what we're working with. Alright, cool. So as you can see, super smooth. I love the chords and the melodies in this track. Now we just need a super smooth, cool bass line to sort of pull it all together. So here I have 3 versions of the song with the 808. The first version, all the way to the left, is the simplest one. That's the first step. The second one is adding a few more notes just to sort of give it its own rhythm and melody. And the third version, all the way to the left, is what I'm going to end up going with, which is adding more bends between the notes on top of the second one. So we have the first one here. Let's take a listen. I'll bring up the MIDI. So for this first version, the most simple one, what I've pretty much done to start out with is I've put the bass note wherever the chords are and just used the root note of that chord. Now I'm going to go over to this next version that I've made. Let's take a listen to this version. So most of the notes still hit exactly where the chords hit. You'll notice that there's a few bends and a few extra notes in there too, just to switch up the rhythm of the bass line a little bit, distinguishing it from the chords. So now we'll go on to the third one, the most advanced one, where I've added just a few more touches to make our bass line smoother and stand out a little more in our track. So as you can see, I've added a few more things on top of the second version to create the third version. So here we still have this bend that we had in the second version. I've added another bend right here, so it goes For anyone who knows theory, a lot of times what I like to do when I bend up is I go up either a fifth or an octave. For you guys who don't know theory, just do whatever sounds the best. I would suggest learning some theory though, because it'll really help out your production skills. So now that we've played through all three, I want to just sort of go through and compare each of them just so you can see exactly the differences. So here we have version 1, the simplest one. Then we have version 2, gets a little more detailed. And then we have version 3. So each time I'm adding a few different bends in the notes and giving the bass its own melody and rhythm. So that's one way that we can improve our bass lines and 808s by giving them their own distinct feel within our production. Now again, you don't need to do this every time, but if the track calls for it, now you have another trick up your sleeve.